Long before Tommy Aldridge ever strapped on a pair of double bass drums, he found himself captivated by the elegant control of Joe Morello. As a boy raised on southern rock and blues, Aldridge could have followed the well-trodden path of rudimentary hard-hitting rock drumming. But Morello, a jazz virtuoso with Dave Brubeck's quartet, offered something else entirely: subtlety, intricacy, and discipline. Morello's performance on Take 5 was a masterclass in navigating odd time signatures with effortless grace. "That guy had chops for days," Aldridge said in an interview with Rhythm magazine. "He had a way of making 5/4 swing and sound completely natural. That really stuck with me."
Hearing Take 5 by the Brubeck Quartet, Joe Morello, and it just kind of, I don't know, struck a nerve, so to speak. I was only like 7 or 8 at the time, but it was really compelling to me. I didn't understand it, of course. It was in 5/4, and pretty radical for just a young guy. It still is, but that I heard it and it just kind of mesmerized me, and still does.
What especially fascinated Aldridge was Morello's deep understanding of dynamics. Rather than just keeping time, Morello could shape a song with restraint or unleash a thunderstorm of fills when needed. This insight planted an early seed in Aldridge's mind that technical drumming didn't have to come at the expense of musicality. But admiring Morello was one thing. Emulating his feel in the context of Southern rock was quite another. For Aldridge, that meant expanding his musical vocabulary. Tommy Aldridge's entry point into rock drumming at its most daring came through Ginger Baker.
Yeah, but you're flying them around the drum, you get.
The cream drummer, often viewed as a volatile figure, was a paradox. A jazz-trained musician playing proto-metal rhythms, blending African polyrhythms with psychedelic excess. Aldridge found this cross-genre wizardry impossible to ignore. He was out of his mind, in the best way possible, Aldridge once said in a fan Q&A. What he did with Cream, especially live, sounded like nothing else. He'd go off on these long solos that were part jazz, part tribal warfare. He broke all the rules. One of the most influential aspects of Baker's style for Aldridge was his refusal to be merely a timekeeper. Baker treated the drums like a lead instrument. In live performances, such as the famed Toad solo, Baker demanded attention, not as a supporting player, but as a commanding force. This concept of the drummer stepping forward, claiming space in the spotlight, would become a hallmark of Aldridge's live presence. But there was another technical element that Baker popularized, which Aldridge would push further still. Long before the sight of two bass drums became a common visual cue in hard rock and heavy metal, it was Louis Bellson who first introduced the setup in a serious way. Known for his work with Duke Ellington and Count Basie, Bellson was as much an innovator as he was a performer. When Aldridge first saw Bellson in archival footage, he was struck by how much elegance Bellson brought to what looked, on paper, like an aggressive setup. Louis was the first guy I ever saw using two bass drums and making it look like ballet, Aldridge recalled. He had speed and finesse. It wasn't about brute force, it was about what you could say with your feet. For Aldridge, Bellson's use of the double bass drum wasn't just a gimmick, it was an entire expressive language. This gave him the blueprint for developing a hard-hitting but rhythmically rich approach that he later refined with Ozzy Osbourne and Whitesnake. However, Bellson's roots were firmly in jazz and big band. Aldridge needed someone who brought the same kinetic intensity into the realm of electric blues and hard rock. Enter John Bonham, a man whose playing bridged the raw force of rock with the detailed musicality of jazz and funk. Aldridge, like virtually every drummer of his generation, considered Bonham a towering influence. Bonham had this feel that was so deep, so locked in. It was like a freight train with groove, Aldridge told Modern Drummer. People focus on how hard he hit, but it was the space between the notes, the way he used ghost notes and accents, that was so smart. What fascinated Aldridge most about Bonham was his use of triplets on the bass drum. The infamous good times, bad times footwork was a revelation. It showed that rhythmic complexity didn't need to be flashy to be effective. It could be subtle, grounded, and deeply powerful. Aldridge took this philosophy into his own playing, especially when joining the high-octane lineups of bands like Black Oak, Arkansas, and later Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz. Yet there was one drummer whose ferocity and flair mirrored Aldridge's future stage persona more closely than any other. Where Bonham swung like a hammer, Mitch Mitchell danced like a flame. Best known as the drummer behind the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Mitchell brought a jazz-rooted finesse and improvisational energy that transformed Hendrix's live performances into something unpredictable. Aldridge was a huge admirer of Mitchell's technique. He played like Elvin Jones with a Marshall stack behind him. He once joked, he never played it safe. It was like watching someone ride a tornado. Mitchell's playing on tracks like Fire and Manic Depression demonstrated how drumming could shape the momentum and direction of a song in real time. He would flutter around the snare and toms with high-speed rolls, interject with offbeat cymbal crashes, and respond to Hendrix in a call and response that bordered on telepathy. This willingness to take risks on stage resonated with Aldridge, who would later make a name for himself as one of the most animated and aggressive live drummers in rock. But with Mitchell came the understanding that it wasn't just about power or agility, it was about interaction. And it was this concept of the drummer as an active musical conversationalist that drove Aldridge to seek out drummers who could do it all. Ainsley Dunbar never achieved the household name status of Bonham or Baker, but to musicians, he was revered. From stints with Frank Zappa, to Journey, Whitesnake, and even David Bowie, Dunbar was known for his ability to adapt to any genre and still sound like himself. "He's one of the most underappreciated drummers ever," Aldridge said in a radio interview. "That guy could go from blues to fusion to progressive rock in the same set. He was a machine, with taste." Dunbar's reputation as a precision player who could bring flair when needed aligned closely with Aldridge's own aspirations. In particular, Dunbar's work on albums like Electric Warrior by T-Rex and Infinity by Journey demonstrated how a drummer could remain both subtle and impactful across radically different contexts. This adaptability inspired Aldridge to hone his versatility, especially during his session years. But where Dunbar kept his playing tightly coiled, Aldridge would eventually explode onto the scene with theatricality and speed as his calling cards. If Louis Bellson gave Aldridge the concept of double bass drums and Ginger Baker showed him how to go off-piste, Billy Cobham showed what could happen when every limb worked like a separate engine. As the powerhouse behind the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Cobham fused jazz, funk, Latin and rock into an explosive technical style. Aldridge was floored by what he heard on Spectrum. "Billy took drumming to another level," he said. "It wasn't just fast or complicated, it was smart, it was musical, and it was devastating." Cobham's ambidextrous drumming and his use of large kits encouraged Aldridge to push the boundaries of his own physical ability. He took up intense limb independence practice and focused on foot speed, not just for effect, but to replicate some of Cobham's more complex rhythmic patterns. But where Cobham operated mostly in fusion circles, Aldridge had his eyes set on the hard rock stage. It was there, in the loudest and most electric corners of rock, that all these influences would converge. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Tommy Aldridge's biggest influences, then you'll want to watch Phil Collins name his 12 favourite drummers. Just click the thumbnail on screen now to keep watching.